Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Age of Wonders Planetfall. So today we're going to be talking about the Vanguard Heritor, and I might not do too many Heritor videos, not because I don't think they're good, but because they don't seem to really have a lot of interlinking synergies with really anything. I think Heritor is, as a secret technology, one that just kind of does its own thing for the most part. There are certain things that you can mix it with to make it so that it sort of meshes well with other things, but you're really looking at a faction that is kind of doing, you're either going to be doing a lot of Vanguard stuff with a little bit of Heritor stuff, or you're going to be doing a lot of Heritor stuff, or you're going to be splitting your techs too much and you're never going to get the high tier stuff in either tree there. I'd personally say that you're better off in this case going for the Heritor stuff, and then just using the early game Vanguard stuff and Vanguard doctrines and operations, because those are quite strong. But the units, I would definitely say go for the Heritor ones. So anyway, let's take a look quickly at the tech tree here for the society side of things. This side has got pretty rough stuff here. So Intercommunion, it lets your units carry 1 additional essence charge, which is not actually as bad a bonus as it sounds. This actually just means that each of your units is capable of, if they harvest that essence, getting to the point where they can get an extra 10% damage as compared to if you didn't take this. The real reason it's useful is that there are some units that purge all of their essence for a big bonus. So even though you're only getting 10% bonus from the essence charge passively, being able to use those activatables and have them hit with an extra value of essence charge actually makes them really, really strong. So if you're going for the Heritor side of things, this one's really, really strong. If you're going more for the other side of things, I would say that this is not quite as good there. No matter how you look at it though, I don't think this is an amazing bonus, and there are definitely ones that can work better, but it's kind of what Heritor gets. The next one here, Technoclass Crusade, against mechanical and integrated units, all friendly units gain plus 10% damage and have an 8 strength chance to inflict entropic decay. This is actually really, really strong if you are up against the Synthesis faction. If you're not up against Synthesis, this is a little bit more situational, but even if you are, it's something that's not giving it the biggest bonus out there, but situationally, if you find yourself in wars against like a bunch of Synthesis people or against a bunch of people who are using tech units, this can be kind of okay. It's kind of a sort of weird bonus as far as that goes, just given what it's like there. Next up, you get access to Sacred Resurgence here, getting you Divine Legion. This only impacts one unit that you're able to get, and that unit is one that you can't build, so you can't even mass spam them. So this one's actually really, really situational. This one gives you an extra 2 shields and gives you an additional 2 essence charges, as well as resurgence for the drained unit, which is a weak sort of pseudo shotgun-y type unit that's capable of mind controlling enemies if it hits prime rank. They are extremely weak, quite fragile, and they're not necessarily the strongest unit out there, but there's some interesting things you can do with them once you get sort of cap level there. I've never actually figured out what the hell resurgence does here. Let's go look that up here, because this just doesn't really come up. Oh, so it comes back to life if it's killed. Well, that would be useful, but in any event, like, just generally speaking, don't worry about this one that much unless you're doing some weird tricks there. I tried it out for some weird things to do. You can actually get these guys to hold 5 essence charges and be a really cheap to produce and acquire unit, so long as you're capable of using the operation that gets you them consistently, which is not necessarily that easy. But if they do have all 5 essence charges and they've got Divine Legion up and they've got a whole bunch of other stuff going for them, they can hit really, really hard, and they're also capable of using a grenade-like weapon later on that's extremely, extremely damaging. So this can be good for those sort of fringe situations there, but is it worth a Doctrine slot? I don't really necessarily know that it is. Lastly, you get their actual economic bonus, City of the Awakened, plus 20 to happiness, and the colonist acquisition threshold is reduced by 20%. The colonist acquisition threshold being reduced is not super important because it's a pretty late game tech. By the time you're looking at getting this, it's a little bit later on. 20 happiness is really, really powerful potentially, but it's also very randomized. I don't like it for that particular reason, but it is quite strong, I have to admit that. And it's what you get with the Heritor faction. The reason this is strong is because you're capable of getting resources like Cosmite and Influence through through happiness. If you get a happiness event for in a city that produces influence, you can get a big boost in influence. If you get it happening in a Cosmite city, you can get a big boost in Cosmite. Either of those things happening is a humongous boost to what you're able to put out throughout your colonies. And because of that, it's capable of giving you stuff that you really, really need. It's just also capable of giving you stuff you don't really need. Because of this, I don't necessarily think it's that reliable of a sort of economic bonus there. But again, it's the only late game economic bonus you're really looking at here with the Heritor. And even as the Vanguard, like their late game ones are not necessarily that economically focused either. So you're generally speaking going to be looking at getting something like the City of the Awakened there, and potentially something like Planetary Conquest. So yeah, I think that for the most part, the Doctrines, even though I've used these ones, I would mostly go with the Vanguard ones. They're just a little bit stronger in the general sense there. And you can also not prioritize operation effectiveness that highly. You don't necessarily need it as much, although I really do like it for the tactical operations, so I do think it is a little bit important for that. Next up, we get the military tab here. Like I said, you're going to be going either hard on the Vanguard tech path and getting really, really powerful units through that way, or you're going to be going through the Heritor tech path and getting really powerful units that way. None of the Heritor units can equip any of the weapon mods from like any of the factions because they're essence-based weaponry doesn't have mods in the standard weapons trees, not in any of them. So you're not at any particular disadvantage as far as trying to upgrade them using Vanguard. And in addition to that, none of the units like that you produce use the essence weapon channel either, so they can't use the standard stuff that these guys have either. Now, they sort of make up for this by the fact that a lot of the abilities and weapons that the Heritor use can be applied to units that do not natively use Essence and grants them an ability to get Essence through that system. So we can take a look, for example, at the Aztec Confiscator. This can be applied to any unit, and it's actually not that useful for your own Heritor units. This is only useful for stuff out of it, but well, it's still useful a little bit for the other ones, but it provides a small chance of applying energy drain on all of your attacks there. And this is not necessarily a huge chance there. It's strength 4 realistically for most of your mainline combatants that would take this as Vanguard, which is half the value of the Siphoner. If you're actually taking the unit that's meant to be doing this sort of thing, these guys have a strength 8 drain chance to apply. So these guys are much, much better at getting those essence charges by attacking stuff. This just sort of gives you a very low chance where it's nice if you manage to get 1 or 2 of them along the way there. And if you do manage to get one, you can then use Essence Focus, giving you an extra 30% accuracy for 1 turn. Hypothetically, this means that your standard infantry can also get up to the point where they're getting plus 30% damage, meaning that for a tier 1 mod, or actually it could even go up to plus 40%, including the base 10, if you manage to also have the thing that increases your essence capacity. But that sort of combination means that this theoretically could be about as good as the thermal targeting array in terms of damage efficiency. The only thing is that you can't get both the accuracy bonus and the damage bonus at the same time with the Aztec Confiscator, because you have to sacrifice all your essence charges to get the accuracy bonus. So kind of misses out on that element there. The other thing is this lets you apply the energy drain to your opponents. This reduces their attack value by 10%, which is a pretty okay debuff there, because it does stack up to 5 times there. It does have a duration though, so you're looking at dealing a maximum of 50% reduction of their attack damage, which is pretty big. They've got a similar sort of mod here for the melee weapons as well. If you've got a melee unit instead of ranged one, they would take this instead. It's got a sort of melee burst type effect there that's capable of dealing a surprising amount of damage, but I would say that generally speaking, you're never going to use this as the Vanguard because they don't have any melee units other than your heroes. You could throw that on a hero if you really wanted to. I think that other things are a little bit better. So yeah, and this is also how you get the drain to that particular unit. You condemn a specific unit on the battlefield using your operation points, and then you kill that unit and they become drained. That's the only way you can get them. Generally speaking, in the early game, you're going to want to use this as much as possible to get as many of those extra free units as you possibly can. Well, they're not free. You're paying 60 for the priming cost, and you're paying like 1 in upkeep for each drain that you get. But the more that you get, the faster they can sort of level up, and the more that you can use to mind control like late game units if you want to. So next up, you get the Scythe Nur. This guy's actually really quite okay. He's got a range 7 repeating weapon with strength 9 there. And if you sort of compare that to the Trooper, the standard Trooper has got like a strength, I believe, 8 or 9 weapon, I think, as well. So it's pretty comparable to that sort of thing there. Yeah, if we look here, it's a strength 9 weapon there, same sort of thing there. But it's a much more rare damage type there, so you're less likely to find a lot of resistance against it. You can't really mod it, though, is the problem. Even looking at this stuff here, there's nothing that really mods the Siphoner weapon in any sort of meaningful way. You can also get the Siphoner Staff. I think that adding this to your characters is a great way to get Essence Drain on your characters, which is a good thing to do. You're going to generally want to do that. At this tier, you're also looking at getting the Aztec Protector Incarnation in the mod slot style of things. So generally speaking, though, what I want to say is that the Siphoner is a defensive type unit as far as the way you would want to mod it. You could theoretically try to mod these guys so that they're more offense-orientated, but realistically speaking, like they've only got 35 out of 35 hit points, which is pretty hard to mod to be really, really durable, but you can get there. They've got 1 armor, 2 shields, which is pretty good actually, and they've got some other things that make them kind of okay at staying alive. In particular, they can use those essence charges to do things like get shields potentially, but realistically speaking, what you want to do with these guys is get them as tanky as possible, and then use that Aztec Siphon to gain that extra damage rate, because you can get up to 40% bonus damage out of these guys, which is kind of like having a really high tier damage mod as well as a low tier damage mod stacked together. So that brings their attack damage up to a respectable amount once you've got them full of essence from the enemy that you've stolen. The other thing that you can then do is use Devotion. This gives all the essence charges from this caster to whoever you're casting it at, which means that if you've got someone who can't use essence naturally, you can then dump all this essence onto them and they'll get that 40% attack bonus, which is really, really powerful. Alternatively, you can use this for the other effect, which is it restores all its action. Well, it does both simultaneously, but you restore all the action points of that unit there. Being able to use your Siphon to drain the enemy down so that they have 50% reduced damage, as well as giving yourself increased damage, as well as the ability to then throw that into extra action economy on, as well as buffs on powerful units, is why you want to build these guys tanky, because the longer they can sort of sit at the front line and use those abilities, it's going to be a lot stronger than trying to make these guys glass cannon, because if they're glass cannon, they just immediately like die, and you don't really get a whole ton of benefit of the Siphon ability there, or Devotion, or really anything else out of these guys. You want them tough. So the other way that you mod those guys is really, really cheap. They're always capable of getting at least 1 essence charge by using the defense mode Essence Harvest. Once they've done that, they can then use Devotion. So what you can do is have a bunch of Siphoners with like 0 mods and 1 really modded to hell unit. And each turn that really expensive powerful unit can get a double action, or you could go like a couple Siphoners and then a couple good units or whatever. Like you could go like a 4 Siphoners, 2 really powerful units. And what happens is every turn, both of your really powerful units are capable of doing 2 actions, so they could do that like every single turn, I think. No, not quite every turn, but pretty close. Or you could do some variation of that kind of stack there. And basically what that would let you do is have your expensive unit that you've spent like 150 Cosmite on or whatever, take 2 sets of actions every turn, and you only had to pay for 1 of them. Whereas these guys are free as far as Cosmite goes if you just build them naked, which you can definitely do. Next up, we've got access to the Quintessence Arc Awakening. This gives you the Quintessence Arcs. These things are actually deceptively powerful. The reason that these guys are so good is that they've got access to Essence Battery. Unlike other units that you've got, including all of the other Heritor units, these guys passively generate a single point of Essence every single turn, no matter what the circumstances. This means that they can get up to 4 for free, basically, just as long as you make the game take long enough for them to get there. They're pretty fragile, but they have got a pretty powerful shotgun type blaster. It's a 7-range single target ability there, single action as well. It applies both energy drain and entropic decay. Entropic decay, I believe, is 3 points of damage for up to 5 stacks, I think. Let's double check how many stacks that can get up to. They have like way too many mechanics in like this system here. So anyway, so the Quintessence Arc here, capable of dealing that up to, 5 stacks. So you could theoretically have a unit taking 15 damage per turn after getting like pelted by a bunch of Quintessence Arcs. Realistically, that unit will be dead before you ever get there, but it is a nice sort of added bonus there. The other things that this can do is Sacrament of Vitality. Unit consumes all essence charges, healing all linked units and the arc itself. 6+6 for each essence charge consumed, so up to 30 with this unit, which is really, really powerful, and it could also be applied to an entire stack if you mod these things correctly. That means that you're capable of healing pretty much more than any other unit in the game in a single action there. Even if your units have moved really, really far apart, this still applies to all of them. And then you've also got Sacrament of Decay here. This gives you extra essence damage. It's pretty powerful as well because it can apply like plus 40% to an entire group. The only reason I think this is a bit weak is it's hard to set up because it only lasts for one round. If you've got like 5 other units who are in really good firing positions and you pop this one, it can make a lot of a difference. But then after that, the Quintessence arc itself needs to drag itself back up to 4 charges. This is how it connects to other units that can use those abilities there, but you can actually replace this with a more powerful version there where it can instantly, as a single action, as a single full action, connect to every single unit in that stack there. It does have Defense Mode Essence Harvest, but like I said, this thing generates its own, so it doesn't really need that. Basically, the reason that this thing is so good, though, ultimately, is that it can consistently get up to 4 stacks without having to worry about it. And this has some really interesting implications that I'll show you in a little bit here. Lastly, you get access to the Heritor High Lord. These things are a little bit too expensive for me, but they are quite powerful. The only reason I don't build them is because they're really quite costly and they're expensive. So, and they're a little bit fragile. 2 armor, 2 shield, 50 hit points is actually kind of fragile, so they're pretty easy to kill. Their attacks, though, are really quite good. Essence Drain, 12 strength there, as well as the ability to sort of gain essence charges off that. Pretty nice there. Ruin Machina. This is very situational. This one I don't really use all that often. Mind Puppet. Mind Puppet's interesting because it's not resistible. You can only cast it on dead units. And if you do that, you can bring them back up and have them start fighting for you, including enemy units. But because of the restrictions to it, generally speaking, I think that's better to have this unit fighting using its other abilities. And then lastly, you've got this one. This is the reason that I think this unit's so deadly, actually. It has the ability to just drop down an AoE from 7 range. That deals a huge amount of damage. The amount of damage from this is just kind of ridiculous. The fact that it also applies like 2 stacks of Essence Decay, Entropic Decay, sorry, without checking like for strength, it just applies it. Means that those units are just going to be getting absolutely wrecked for another couple of turns there. It's very, very powerful. Unfortunately, this thing does not actually like have its own way of generating essence other than to hit the enemy with Essence Drain, which is where you would go with some other stuff to try and do that a bit more reliably, or you could just have it attack the enemy a bunch of times until it can use Aztec Judgment naturally. So anyway, taking a look at their mods more closely here, if you want to engage in using Essence, you're going to have to use either the Aztec Confiscator or the Aztec Protector Incarnation, or the Aztec Acolyte Incarnation, or you're going to have to apply the Aztec Lord Incarnation to your basic troops there. And none of them, I think, are amazing for doing what they're doing there, but if I had to pick one for basic bottom tier troops there, it would probably be the Aztec Confiscator. The standard trooper there can use this kind of okay. It doesn't give them a great chance of actually getting Aztec charges, essence charges rather, but it is kind of an okay enough chance that they can risk it. You're generally going to have your troopers mowing down sort of the lower tier units rather than trying to focus fire down the big guys anyway. The next best I would say is the Aztec Protector Incarnation. They're fragile enough that the 8 strength chance on multiple attacks against them means that they're probably actually going to get killed before it can really make a huge difference there. But this can be an okay mod in terms of the fact that it gives you that little bit of extra defense. And it also means that if they keep trying to hit that same unit with the same enemy unit, then they're gradually getting weaker, you're gradually getting a little bit stronger. So this can actually be a pretty reliable way to gain essence, but you might not survive the process. The other ones, this one requires that you get pretty close to stuff or you have to energy drain your own troops there, which I don't really recommend. So this one I think is a little bit janky. It would be probably better on melee type units because you could get up close to an enemy there and apply this to a bunch of things that are nearby. The other thing that you could potentially do is the Aztec Lord Incarnation. This requires that your other units have the ability to gain essence themselves. This lets you suck all of the essence off of them and onto yourself. In addition, you'll heal 8 for every point that you stole, or gain from any other method. So this is really fantastic actually on the Quintessence arcs because it means they've got Regeneration 8, Lifesteal 8. But you could use Tithe to make it so that, for example, a walker had the ability to gain immediately a bunch of essence without having to give it other mods that give it essence. I don't necessarily think that this is my favorite sort of mod for that sort of purpose, though, because I would rather have the unit that is being targeted by Tithe. I would rather that unit also have a bunch of essence, because they can usually make better use of it. Things like the Heritor High Lord, you're not actually allowed to steal from those, actually, I don't believe. But stealing from the Quintessence Ark doesn't make a ton of sense, because it's got a ton of abilities that make good use of it, whereas with the Walker, you're only getting plus 40% damage, or 30% damage even, in that case. So I don't think that's necessarily a super strong mod for them. I think for something like a Walker or something like that, I would probably go with the Aztec Protector Incarnation. I think that one's actually pretty good for those types of units, because they're probably going to draw a decent amount of fire, so they can probably also survive a relatively decent amount of fire there. Gaining essence sort of that way. And similarly again with the walkers, tanks, everything else like that, the Aztec Acolyte Incarnation is not really that useful, because you're looking at stuff that does not really go at the range that they do. The other thing to comment on is that none of these mods work at all with the engineers or the carriers. The reason is, of course, that these mods almost all have activatable abilities. In fact, the ones that don't, I'm not actually sure there is any that does not have an activatable ability now I think about it. But yeah, you can't actually apply any of these bonuses to your turrets. You can't even get the plus 10% damage bonus from these, or plus 1 shield bonus or anything like that to turrets or to drones from your carrier or whatever. All of those sort of units just sort of bounce as far as that goes because of the activatable abilities. The last mod that I didn't really talk about, this one goes on pretty much anything that you want it to go on. The Stech Conduit is capable of doing this Essence Blast that is a lot like the Heritor High Lord's ability, but it allows you to do it as a single action instead of a full round, and it's at slightly lower range, so it's easier to run up to the enemy and blast them with it. I actually find that the Stech Conduit, because it's so much more mobile, is actually easier to lay down than the longer range version that the Stech Lord has. But obviously running ahead into the enemy is not necessarily always a good idea, but yeah, this thing is extremely good. If you're using it on characters, you're going to want them to be ones with the Siphon of Staff, or if you're using it on your Heritor units, you can put it on the Siphoner. It will work just well. Quintessence Ark does it extremely well. The High Lord doesn't really need it. You could actually just use Aztec Judgment on the High Lord, but this thing's just ridiculous. It's an AoE, it's capable of dealing a ridiculous amount of burst damage. It's hard to defend against because it's single action instead of repeating. And I've done 48 damage with this thing on a variety of different units before. I've literally walked up and just slapped down tier 1 units with it, and it just instantly kills them. If there's a mob of those sort of guys all clustered together, it's going to kill all of them. It is absolutely crazy how much damage you can do with an Stech Conduit. So having a Siphoner fill himself up and then run up and grenade them with the Stech Conduit, that's a valid way to use them. The other way that you can do it is to have the Quintessence Arks, and they will passively gain the charges, so they're more guaranteed to get up to the maximum charge value so that they can use it more consistently. I think that that's actually one of my favorite ways to do it. The other way is you could put it on a powerful hero that's got a bunch of stacking modifications that give them % bonuses to their attack damage. You can then push a bunch of extra action points and essence charges onto them using Siphoners, and then they can sort of drop this down and it'll deal that 48 damage that I was talking about earlier. That's sort of how you get to that sort of point. But anyway, that's kind of a look at all of their sort of units there. Like I said, there's not a ton of synergy with a lot of the standard Vanguard units there. The Vanguard troops don't really have anything that's amazing that they can mix it up with. I think one of the only ways that you can really mix this up with them is to sort of go with your own Vanguard troops using their own sort of things there without dipping too heavily into the Heritor stuff here. Just sort of chucking on the Aztec Protector Incarnation can be an okay bonus to a bunch of your standard troops there. Or a bunch of your other sort of things, and just not worrying too much about the actual essence charges there. The essence barrier ability can also be quite good on a unit that needs to go on the defensive because they've taken too much damage, so you can definitely do that. Although even with all those shield points, they might still be killed if they've taken a lot of damage, so it's a bit risky to run that sort of idea, but you could be looking at +6 shield. That is pretty high. It's not just +6 shield, it's +6 shield for them and their allies around them, so a really high amount there. Another way that you could sort of mod them up there is you could give them something like the Aztec Lord Incarnation, just because that way every time you pull stuff from something else, you can get a bunch of healing that way, but I don't think that that's really worth it. But it is a good source of healing, because unlike a lot of other sort of sources of healing, this applies every sort of 2 turns. You got it on a free action as a fairly low cooldown thing, so you can keep a bunch of the Quintessence arcs in the background and have them sort of siphoning up stuff there. The units that I'd say work best with the Heritor stuff are the ones that best make use of the, in my opinion, the Aztec Protector Incarnation, because you're capable of getting like a decent extra bunch of stacks of damage from that. You can get up to 30% extra damage on, for example, like a laser tank over here. If we take a look here, how much essence charge this could have. It could have up to 3. That's 30% extra damage, which is pretty damn good for a defensive mod. That gives it a point of shielding, as well as the ability, if necessary, to apply Essence Barrier, which basically puts you into a stance where you've got +6 shields, +2 armor, because you get your defensive stance bonus as well. This kind of thing could also be pretty useful on something like, say, the Walker. It's a little bit less useful again on that drone carrier, just because the drone carrier does not gain the ability to sort of add that to the drones that it's deploying. So yeah, basically you're looking at a couple different ways to play these guys. One is you sort of go with a couple siphoners that are quite durable and quite capable of enduring a really long fight there. A good stack of siphoners that are heavily defensive, and you can go with some of the mods up here, but I personally like giving them the Heritor Lord modification there, the Stech Conduit, just because that's actually ridiculously powerful. And then you could go ahead and throw on something like, say, the Interlocking Armor, just so that they gain that stagger resistance, so that they can fire more shots, and also because it gives them a little bit more durability. That sort of build there is pretty okay for these guys. It'll put them up to a 50 hit points and 2 armor and 2 shields, plus whatever bonuses you're able to get out of your city there. Usually you're going to be able to get them up to 4 armor, which is all in all pretty good defenses, 6 in total. But it gives them the ability to survive long enough to keep using that Aztec Siphon until they're capable of just dropping the nukes down on the opponent from 5 tiles away, which is really powerful. The other way is you just go to Scythe Nur and you don't really focus too heavily on the mods for these guys, and then you start focusing on producing things like a couple tanks with really heavy Vanguard mods, and you're going to want to go with stuff like you're definitely going to want stuff like the reactive armor plating there. You're going to potentially want to give this guy something like the nanites injectors there, and you could even give your tank the sequential kill system or something like that, or you could more realistically give your tank something like the flash module, which makes it so that your tanks are capable of sort of rumbling up to the enemy there, dealing a bunch of damage, and it's not a huge amount of damage, but it's okay damage, and surviving a lot of enemy fire there. And as soon as you've gotten those situations where you can, your cheap siphoner just gives it an extra action. Then the next turn, a different siphoner gives the tank another action, and then the third turn another siphoner gives that tank an action. This would mean that your tank is constantly getting double actions. It's capable of getting an extra 30% damage, even though it's got a defensive mod. It's capable of resisting a ton of damage and being just a huge pain in the ass for the enemy to try and get rid of. And if they try to run past it, you can actually just run your tank. You can just sort of move your tank slowly backwards while the siphoners actually run the hell away from it, because if your opponent's using up all of their actions on running instead of fighting your tank, they can end up in a really bad situation. And they can also put themselves into a situation where they've got their back to the tank, and it's capable of flanking all their units as they run past, trying to get your siphoners. So that's another way to play it. Another way to play it is just spam Quintessence arcs. Just take nothing but Quintessence arcs with the Stech Conduit. That actually works out quite well there. You could also, of course, build Heritor High Lords for your sort of top tier unit. Instead of going at all into the Vanguard side of things, you could just use the Heritor High Lord instead of the tank. It's a little bit harder to make this guy durable, especially for not going out of your lane to get a few of the Vanguard things, but it's still pretty okay. It's pretty good at what it does there. It is technically a heavy cyborg unit, so it is still allowed to get reactive armor plating, which I think would be a pretty good mod for it, but it's a pretty tricky build, I would say, or rather, by the time you get there, you probably could have won using pretty much anything else there. So let's take a look at some of the stacks that I've got lying around here. It's quite a hectic game. Over here we've got some trash mobs. There's going to be loads and loads of trash mobs that you're going to be finding. Here we've got the Drained, and I haven't really done a ton to show them. Now, this is a prime rank one with the Empowered Drained module. What this does is it lets them mind control a higher tier unit. So if we take a look at another mob here, we've gained access to a rocket artillery and a Baron, both from the Devar. These were actually gotten from one of these types of missions like down in here. And the reason that I'm capable of getting those is because of the Drained. They're capable of running up to the enemy and using mind dominance on them. It's a fantastic way to trade in a cheap tier 1 kind of lousy unit for a very, very powerful late game unit that you're able to find in mind control in that sort of way there. And this unit's been actually pretty good to me for considering the investment I put into it. Same thing for the rocket artillery. Those things both worked out quite well for me. So anyway, these things, the Drained are just mostly kept in their own stacks there. I've used other units to sort of fill them in, and they just stick with my main armies to either snipe a few experience points from the sides there, or to try and mind control something when they get an opportunity, or to sort of swarm in and just use their shotgun-y type attack. It's actually quite powerful once they get up to cap level, because they can get actually a decent number of bonuses for the Empowered Drained and from their prime rank abilities here. Not necessarily a great unit, but it is technically a cheap unit that's pretty spammable, as long as you know what you're doing there. Over here, again, we've got sort of crazy things going on, but mostly we're trying to go for that Quintessence Arc spam here. If I was smarter, I would not be using the Empowered Arc module. I'd be using probably something like the Nanite Injectors. The Empowered Arc would be something you just put on one of your arcs instead of all of them. There is a trick that you can do with these guys, though, in that normally speaking, you're only allowed to use the Sacrament of Vitality once per battle. But if I've got 6 of these, I can just switch out who's using the Connect All and Communion ability. So I start with one using Connect All and Communion. A bunch of people get a bunch of damage, so I use that one's ability to use Sacrament of Vitality, and then I have them all disengage that. I disconnect everybody from that Communion as a free action, because it's a free action to do that, and then I have another one spend its turn connecting all in Communion, and then I have another heal, Prime, and Ray whenever I need it. So that's quite powerful. So that's one reason to have all of them having it. But the other thing you can do with these guys is just make them a little bit more durable. The other thing you could potentially do is use the Aztec Confiscator, because the Aztec Confiscator is required to gain back essence from the Stech Conduit. The Stech Conduit is how this stack deals damage. Basically, if I derp around for a few turns there, maybe fire off a couple pot shots, because this does gain charges by shooting at people, you can just dump this on the enemy and instantly kill them. It's really gross. The other thing that we got here is the Aztec Lord Incarnation. This thing means that these arcs gain back hit points every single turn just passively. They also regain hit points whenever they hit an enemy with a standard attack, so it's a good way to keep these guys in the fight there. They're still not very durable, but we can take a look at another stack to look at what we got going on there. Down here we're building another Quintessence Arc stack there. Cap level they have a decent 79 hit points, which is pretty respectable. It's not huge, but it's pretty good there, especially considering it's a unit that's got lifesteal and regeneration, and decent defensive statistics otherwise. Up here we've got some of our earlier stacks here. We've got access to one that's got a Siren, which we mind controlled. We've got access to a Subjugator, which we mind controlled. We've got access to a Quintessence Arc, a Scythe Nur, and a Assault Bike that's been with us forever. The hero is really where the effort in this goes to a certain degree there. The Siphon are sort of piggybacking around that guy and giving them essence charges and extra actions whenever they need it. Honestly speaking, I would rather have another Siphoner rather than this bike in a lot of situations, but you have what you have. Over here we just got some trash. These guys actually came along because I've got the Siren, and the Siren is capable of creating chrysalises. There's no Psyfish on this map here, but these ones were evolved from chrysalises that I gained from that Siren, which is pretty funny. We've also purchased a bunch of trash units here. These guys are actually, like, all things considering, these guys are actually pretty good Spacer Melters. Probably one of the stronger Spacer units, and possibly one of the toughest to kill units that you can get from an NPC dwelling. Over here, just more trash mobs. We've got the Indentured from the Subjugator, because the Subjugator is capable of creating Indentured. So you're going to end up with pretty weird armies when you're using Heritor, and you're doing a lot of mind control. Over here we got another stack with a bunch of weird stuff, but we've also got a more focused one here. Quintessence Arc, a couple Siphoners, and a hero. The hero is, again, the one that's going to get a lot of the attention from the Siphoners, but in this particular case, I'm not at all unhappy giving these Melters extra actions from the Siphoners. They got a very, very powerful attack there. Over here we got a couple Indentured and an entire stack of Mind Control built Drained. These ones actually have a slightly different build, because these ones are actually meant for combat. The thing is, these guys can get to actually 5 stacks, which means that they can use the Stech Conduit, and since they can gain a bunch of extra bonuses when they're at full stacks of full stacks, they can actually deal like an extra 10 damage on theirs. So that means that these guys have got probably the strongest essence blast that you can get. I think it's even higher than the Heritor Lord. So I think that this is kind of the fringe situation that these guys are good in. Unlike a lot of the other units, we've given these guys Aztec Protector Incarnation. The reason we're giving them Aztec Protector Incarnation is because it's hard to gain charges with the Drained. They don't gain them passively, and they don't gain them through defensive stance. So you're looking for situations where you can be giving these guys more than one a turn at a fairly high frequency, and the Aztec Protector Incarnation is the only way to do it. Unfortunately, they're not very durable. They've got 61 hit points and 1 shield, 1 armor at prime rank, and there's no way you can get the city bonuses on these guys. So they're pretty weak in terms of survivability. So unfortunately, it's a little bit hard. You're going to have to play pretty carefully with these guys to get them up to 5 ranks there. You're quite often going to want to use either operations, or you're going to want to use the bonuses from your siphoners, which are in that nearby stack there. So there's a bunch of different ways you can get them up to where you need them to be. I think we've got some other stacks somewhere else, but I cannot remember for the life of me what they are, where they are, or what's going on as far as that goes. That might be all of them. I think we had some units on our capital as well, actually. Yeah, we had a couple more trash mob stack, or another trash mob stack there starting up. But yeah, that's basically everything that I've sort of been building. The general strategy for this one has been pure chaos, but the general intention, early game, it's used those Heritors, which are really, really cheap because I'm not modding them at all. And then we're sort of forcing our way through by increasing the number of Quintessence arks, which are designed to nuke people to oblivion with the Stech Conduit. Capable of basically instantly destroying pretty much anything that they come across. One of the best sort of units for that kind of bullshit that I've encountered in all my playthroughs so far. The other thing that you could do in the early game is use those siphoners as a real sort of heavy infantry type unit there. Like I said, I think that they can do that quite well. If I was going to do that, what I would do is go the nana injectors, because that's always really, really powerful. Interlocking armor, that's not interlocking armor, that is. And I would go with something like, say, maybe the Stech Conduit still, because that's just really, really good. Or we could be looking at something like the Aztec Protector Incarnation. Either of those would be pretty powerful in this sort of situation. The jetpack is ironically not particularly necessary on these guys, because they, typically speaking, want to be a little bit away from the enemy, but not too far away from them, and they can just sort of slowly move around while picking off enemies with their repeated shots there. I think that's generally speaking how you use these guys. Using the jetpack is more for things that have powerful close-in attacks that have difficulty getting spacing, or units with flanking. These guys don't really have that sort of thing going on there, so that's really not necessary for them. Other units that we could take a look at potentially here, the Engineer. There's no really amazing sort of Engineer build for these guys. In their particular case, you're really just building them when you've got a moment to, and you've got really strong kinetic mods. If you've sort of gone for the Vanguard build instead of the Heritor one. The gunship, again, doesn't really run into tremendously good things to synergize with. The assault bike doesn't have anything amazing to synergize with here. I can't really think of any of these being amazing on the jet bikes here, or on the bikes rather. The Vanguard laser tank, like I mentioned, the only thing I would really consider putting on these guys is the Aztec Protector Incarnation, which would make it a little bit more durable and give it something to do that increases its damage and stuff like that. Never underestimate just being able to throw an extra like 30% damage on your units as well, so that is something to consider. But there's none of these that I think that I would really want to heavily invest in for just the ability to do that. But laser tank and walkers are the ones I think that I would go that route with if I really was pressed for it. So anyway, that is going to be our video on the Vanguard Heritor. I think that the Vanguard are not necessarily going to be the best with this faction, or the secret tech rather, but at the same time I don't think Heritor plays nicely with anybody necessarily. I think that they're just one of those rare things where you either go Heritor or you go for whatever it is you're playing as, and that's kind of just how it works there. So if you're also wondering, we win in 6 turns, but unfortunately there's a game-breaking crash that happens if I hit end turn here, so unfortunately I cannot actually win this game. So this will be the first time that I've done this where I don't actually win it on extreme difficulty, but honestly speaking, I think this is close bloody enough because we will definitely be winning this game here. So anyway, that is our video for today. Hope you found this enjoyable, and of course, as always, I hope to see you guys all next time.